some new life into all our creative mornings. So I hope you've been enjoying them, and please feel free to provide some feedback at any point, whether it's our volunteers or myself. We're always welcome to hearing how we can make sure that the events just keep getting better and better. And so Creative Mornings Ottawa, Creative Mornings is a monthly breakfast series. It's in 173 cities now, in 62 different countries. So it's just always growing and expanding. And Creative Mornings Ottawa, fun fact, is actually the 29th Creative Mornings chapter to have started. So not bad, Ottawa, not bad. Yeah. And so as I was saying, Creative Mornings is all over the world, so please keep this in mind if you're traveling this summer. Creative Mornings is open to everyone, so no matter where you are, if there's a chapter there, they're going to welcome you with open arms. So same thing as you would do here, hop on the website, go to the city that's nearest you, sign up and show up to the event. And I think it's a really wonderful way to kind of experience a city through a different lens. So is anybody actually here from a different chapter? My man, welcome. Where are you from? Wicked. Thanks for coming. That's great. Yeah, so 20,000 people gather every morning to talk about Creative Mornings, talk about the monthly theme, and that number is just always growing. And so a quick little talk about the manifesto. As you all know, it's kind of breathes our values and truth of Creative Mornings. And I was thinking to myself today of what I've been doing is trying to pull one of these lines out, or you can see it here as well, and kind of introduce it with the theme, introduce it with why we try to show up every morning, why it's important to us. And this is the line that I chose this month. So we are here to support you, celebrate with you, and encourage you to make things that you love. And I was thinking to myself, how can I work this into the theme of genius? And I was trying to think of how I'd work those two together. And some of you may know that I'm a new mother to this beautiful little boy. I don't know if everyone can see. This is Bachi. And I was trying to think of my own moments of genius. So when have I really kind of struck light? And I couldn't think of anything, which I don't know what that says about myself. But I was thinking about Bachi and how everything as he's growing and learning is a new moment of genius. So things like, stop barking at your butt when you're pooping. It's not that scary. Or how he knows that if he bats his eyes at dad, he'll likely get a treat as opposed to doing it with mom. So he's always learning new things, and it's always fun to kind of explore world with him and realize his moments of genius as he does as well. And I hope that that's kind of what we do with you today. I hope that you get a chance to kind of, whether it's not today or through other talks, but explore your own moment of genius, and hopefully we can help you tap into that or even seize that moment to make sure that that's a potential for you. And I'll, of course, encourage you to share your this morning on Twitter, Instagram. We have our global theme hashtag, which is, of course, CMGenius. So there's other Creative Mornings doing the exact same thing around the world today and having different conversations and having their own spin on genius. So it's really cool if you hop on Twitter, you can kind of see what they're talking about and how we're doing things differently and how they're doing things differently over there as well. So we'll get right down to business. Kwende, when I first met him, I sat down with him and he was so passionate and excited about doing this talk, and he was kind of telling me his idea, and I was sitting there and I was looking at him and I was like, I have no clue what you're talking about. He's like, I'm going to talk about this concept of genius loci, and I was like, this sounds fantastic. And he's telling me all about it, and I'm looking at him with these glazed eyes and smile and nod, And but what was so beautiful about it is just his passion for something. And I think that's so inspiring. And I hope that we're able to bring you more speakers like this that are just so passionate about what they do and are able to kind of transpire that passion with the audience. And I'm sure you're about to see this, and you'll be doing the smile and nod, maybe a little less than me, but it's my pleasure to welcome Kwende. Kwende does work for the city of Ottawa and also is the founder of Time Code, which is, I think, the largest and longest kind of monthly music and dance event in Ottawa, and it's actually there's one going down tonight, so if anybody's interested in that, I'm sure he'll tell you all about it. So without further ado, Kwende.
Hello, everyone. try that again. Hello, everybody. Man, I'm really glad to be here. It's one of these things where, don't mind me if I hold this giant phone. I just have notes on it, so I'm very happy to be here. I'm very happy to not have to anticipate being here. It's one of those things. I've had a really crazy week. One of the things that I'm going to be talking about is not necessarily myself as a genius, but about the idea of this concept of genius loci, the spirit of a place, and sort of it's really about the spirit of this place and the effect it's had on me and what I will be doing in the future. But it did start in the beginning with me thinking that maybe when I got out of high school, I would be a great genius. And so I wrote that in my yearbook as something predictive and something that I thought, okay, I'm going to go to college. I'm going to come up with some great idea. I don't know, maybe I'll write a book. YouTube wasn't that big yet, so I didn't think about making a video of it or anything, but I was just like, okay, I'm going to do something. And this is sort of about also my pursuit of trying to develop a new idea and landing in some unexpected places. So first off, just a little bit about me to introduce myself. I do, a bunch of different stuff. One of the things I do is, or one of the things I did, I came out of the College of the Humanities. I did a Bachelor of the Humanities program at Carleton University. I don't know how many people are familiar with that program. Anybody know that program? Hey, Hums, that's what's up. That's what's up. And so it's a 4-year interdisciplinary thing. The first year is sort of liberal arts and fine arts. No, the first year is actually about myth and symbol. So it's about religious practice, and you read all the primary texts, the Quran, the Rig Veda, the Torah, the Bible, and Tao Te Ching, and all that kind of stuff. And then following that, it's literature following that, it's ancient philosophy, then literature and fine arts, and then political philosophy and that kind of stuff. So it was sort of an interdisciplinary Western liberal arts kind of education that I started with. And then from there, I also am a musician, and I've been doing music for a long time. I started doing piano, played piano up to grade 8 Royal Conservatory, and then kept on doing it in a sort of autodidactic kind of way in terms of electronic music DJing and that kind of thing. I work at the city, and I like thinking about cities. Cities are sort of my jam. I like thinking about things in the context of cities, and then thinking about where cities themselves are going. I'm a bit of an entrepreneur. I run these events called Time Code, which have been going on now for 12 or 13 years in the city. Has anybody been to Time Code in here? That's what's up. Yeah, that's good. Always a few in a crowd. That's what we're aiming for. And tonight, I should mention, we have a boat party going on. We're doing Time Code on a boat. It's our first time on a boat. Not our first time ever on a boat, but it's the first time we've brought the party to a boat. We've individually been on boats before. But yeah, we're going to have Bear Witness with us from A Tribe Called Red. Everybody love A Tribe Called Red? Anybody know about them? That's what's up. That's what's up. And it's all part of the House of Paint Festival, which is going on this weekend. We love House of Paint. We've been doing House of Paint now for 14 years. They've been going on longer than us. So, all that is going on as well. So, anyway, I digress. I do entrepreneurial stuff in terms of running a little record label and running these parties. And then I also like to think about how all of that stuff comes together in a scene and in a space. The last time I was actually in this building, we were doing a party for our 12-year or 10-year anniversary with Quantic, and it was a time. But it was interesting because those types of things are sort of represent the intersection of all of these interests, and I like seeing that happen too. But this is going back to when I was doing my degree in the humanities, and I was just finishing my degree, and I was just almost at the end there. This is about in 2005. And I started generating an idea after my 4th-year political philosophy thing. I said, I think I got maybe my idea that I'm gonna be a genius with. And so it was about, at that time, we had been really looking at we just finished political philosophy. We're looking at political systems and the way that they impacted, the emergence of culture in the West. And I was really not bored with that. I was interested, but I was more interested in thinking about the way that these kinds of ideas impacted like my culture and the culture that I participated in, not so much like the dominant narrative. And so I was interested in thinking about how some of these ideas affected, hip-hop culture, which was the culture that I grew up in, as well, alongside my Caribbean culture here in Canada. And so I knew that I wanted to come up with an original take on the culture. I had read has anybody read Jeff Chang's book? Yes, or what's it called? Can't Stop, Won't Stop, thank you. Has anybody read that book? So, I had read that book and it was so good that I was like, damn, okay, I can't write a book like that. I can't have an idea like that. I got to think of something new. And so I started thinking about how I would cross-pollinate some ideas, with some subject ideas with, the emergence of hip-hop culture. So I started thinking first about race and identity. And I thought maybe I could research race and identity and figure out something critical that Jeff Chang didn't figure out in his book. And I started researching race and identity. And that did not work. And so I thought to myself, maybe it's not race and identity. Maybe I got to think about this musicologically. I got to go to the music department, do a directed study with music, and I'll figure out something that Jeff Chang didn't figure out, in his book. And I did this long research, and it was really good and interesting, but ultimately it did not work. And that was not what I was trying to do. And so then, ultimately, I thought maybe it could be about cities. Maybe it's about where the culture emerged, and there's something about that. And so I started digging around, and I took a few classes, and I realized that I was getting somewhere with this idea, further than I was getting with the other ideas. I said, okay, now I think I got some traction here. Maybe I can start really digging in. And so I jumped in and started taking classes in the geography and architecture department, and I figured that, there might be something there for me to learn. And so, but it wasn't, my entry into it actually wasn't straight architecture and geography, it was film. I took a film class called Cinematic Cities. And it was this class that was looking at cities through the lens of different filmmakers and looking at different cities on film. And it got me really thinking. I actually had, a moment in that class where I was looking at cities and I was looking at, and I was reflecting on my experience of hip hop culture in New York and in other places. And, two quotes sort of stood out to me. We were learning about this guy, Le Corbusier, who was like an architect who developed this tower in the park model of city building. And, thinking about the fact that hip hop emerged out of these giant parks that were in cities, as a result of the way that they were, transformed, I realized that there was something new about the spaces that hip hop emerged from that was maybe a place to investigate. And so, I dug in even further and started learning more about things like morphology and how cities are shaped. And so, I was going down a rabbit hole essentially, and it was interesting. And I kept on digging deeper and deeper until I could get to a place that I recognized essentially. And so I learned a little bit about, the relationship between the kinds of spaces that were built in the Bronx when hip-hop emerged in the 70s and the sort of architectural ideas that were dominating the day, and realized that there was something common about the kinds of spaces that hip-hop was emerging in. And I realized this through watching a film in that class called La Haine. Has anybody seen that film? It's a French film by a guy, Mathieu Kassovitz, about some kids who live in the outskirts of Paris. And it's a story about them and a gun. I won't get into the whole in and out of the story, but there's an amazing scene in the film, which is a helicopter shot above the projects in Paris, or outside of Paris, I should say, in les banlieues. And it gives you a really interesting overhead view of the area that they were living in. And this film, La Haine, was very infused with hip-hop culture. Hip-hop culture is very prevalent in the banlieues outside of Paris. And it was through looking at the spaces outside of Paris and the spaces in the inner cities of the US that I recognized that there was something that was the same. and it was about the ideas about space. Sort of, there was something about the experience of space and this new kind of experience of space. So in this diagram, you can see sort of the changing ways that blocks have been built over time in cities, particularly in North American cities, but in a lot of European cities, modern cities as well, post-World War II. And you can see sort of like a tenement block structure in the 1880s that gradually opened up into this sort of super block thing that you see in the 1930s and late 40s, which were as a result of this guy, Le Corbusier, and the way that he was thinking about, not as a direct result, but his ideas were accepted and scaled up across cities all over the world, such that in modern places they were building places like this. And places like that are the kinds of places where hip-hop emerged from. And so this was something interesting to me because it made me think, well, could hip-hop have emerged in the 1880s when people were in the kinds of configurations that they were in? Did it need the kind of space that only emerged post-World War II in order to emerge? So this got me, back into a little bit of philosophy, which I was thankful for, because I was deep into this architectural stuff, which was, at that point, a little bit new to me. And I wanted to start connecting the dots between maybe this idea about where the culture came from, and a bigger idea, I guess, about what it means to be in places. And so this is where I started doing one of my favorite techniques for coming up with ideas. I always like to use Google to do word association. I tend to just throw. Does anybody know? Oh my goodness, my man he did Brian Eno. Does anybody know about oblique techniques from Brian Eno? You should look this up. Oblique techniques. These are just ways to get yourself out of linear thinking. And so I was going through some oblique techniques, and I was like, oh, one of them said something about opposites, or I can't recall what the specific instruction was, but I started throwing words into Google and related to the experience of places. And that's where I threw the words phenomenology and architecture into Google. And I didn't know what I was going to come up with because this was, again, a random exercise. But what I discovered was this book by this guy, Charles Norbert Schultz, which was called Genius Loci, The Phenomenology of Place. And, thankfully I was still a student at Carleton, so I looked it up, and it was actually at the library. So I went down there, I got the book, and I started reading it, and I realized that, this book was really sort of combining my worlds a little bit in terms of this world of architecture that I was getting into, and then also this world of philosophy that I had just been way deep into. And, it was essentially looking at phenomenology is essentially the study of experience, and obviously architecture is what it is. And so genius loci, or the spirit of place, has been recognized as, I'm just pulled a quote, but this is the quote. It's essentially looking at, the ways in which daily life or the way that architecture is implicated in the daily life and the daily routine of people all the time. And it's really looking at actually architecture that helps people dwell. And the reason that, dwelling is important is because of this guy Heidegger, who is the main philosopher that this book is centered around. Heidegger had this book, which I loved when I did school, called Being in Time. And Being in Time, I'm not going to do like a full long philosophical treatise, but he was about understanding how we navigate the process of being through the process of becoming. And so it's about sort of that middle stage in between when you are something and I guess when you're becoming that thing. Observing any phenomena, when he says that, observing any phenomena, it's important to understand the way that it unfolds in time. And, Heidegger's thing, the most famous example that he gave was the example of a tree. And, essentially that any tree that you observe, you're essentially observing it in an instance where it is dwelling, essentially, but it is constantly in motion, and it is always in a state of becoming. And so, essentially, his whole thing is that you always have to dig to the roots and never just look at the tree, because the tree is only an instance of all the becoming that's happening underneath. And, I started, really thinking about hip hop in a similar kind of way. I said, okay, well then how would I represent these things? What would be the tree? What would be like the roots? Whatever. I started running with the metaphor. And, I realized that my interest extended beyond, the culture directly, but I was actually looking not at the roots, but really at the soil and like what were the conditions that enabled the roots to grow. And so I realized that actually I was not actually looking at something at hip hop. I was looking past hip hop into the way that spaces help generate cultures. And so this was a cool breakthrough for me because essentially I also realized that this wasn't just about one place either. When hip hop emerged, it emerged out of a network of places in this area in the Bronx. So everybody saw that Google Doodle. Hip hop turned 44 this year. There was like did anybody check out that doodle? You could like do mixing and learn about Kool Herc and the whole situation. Anyway, Kool Herc started hip hop culture 44 years ago. Where was Herc? Hold up, I'm trying to find. Here he was. And it started up here by the river, but then eventually there was this whole network of places which emerged in the 7 Mile neighborhood, which incubated the whole start of the culture. And so, it made me realize that this wasn't about one place, it was about a network of places. And I had to try and understand then sort of like, how do we measure or understand networks of places in cities? Is there a way to do that? And moreover, is there a way to do it in a quantitative way? Less on my philosophy tip, which I was comfortable with, but more on something that was actually measurable and that maybe I could, do something original with in terms of being more concrete. So I started doing my thing again on the word association. And I started playing around with words, saying, okay, I'm gonna try this thing, I'm gonna try that thing. And eventually I tried these two words, space and syntax. And I thought, oh, okay, well, maybe there'll be something there. And when I checked it out, I realized, or when I put it into Google, I found, that there was actually a whole discipline and a whole book, like a huge volume by this guy, Bill Hillier, on this theory and discipline called space syntax. And it's really, space syntax is, a set of theories and techniques which was developed for the analysis of spatial configurations, across a range of scales in cities. And it was developed in the 70s, actually, when hip hop was emerging. And so it's about how configurations of space sort of generate co-presence. And it's looking at co-presence really as the foundation of everything that comes after it. And so, it's about being able to measure the kinds of spaces that we dwell together and how those networks in cities or how those spaces are networked in cities. And so it's sort of bringing together this thing that the genius loci was talking about in terms of dwelling with something more concrete that you could actually measure. And it offered me a whole new way of thinking about the kind of problem that I was trying to solve. And so, this is sort of, what I was saying before, that there's the pattern of co-presence in any space is usually based on its design, and that design then affects the kinds of things that come out of it. So this was a new way of thinking about it, and I read some papers that taught me a lot more about the way that the theory worked. It's really based on some axioms about the way that people move through and navigate space. So it's saying essentially if you take into account that people move in lines, interact in convex spaces, and see changing visual fields as they move through different built environments, you can start measuring the amount and different kinds of convex spaces that come across people's path and measure their ability to choose what they're going to do as they move through space. And it's all basically coming down to this, that human behavior doesn't happen in space. It has its own spatial forms. Every kind of human interaction has its own spatial form that's specific to it. And that's no different to the way that this culture emerged. There's a spatial form that was specific to this culture as it was emerging, and that's sort of what I realized I was observing when I realized that there was something specific about the relationship between the places in outer Paris and inner New York. And so, anyway, this is all very exciting. I was doing all this in my basement between 2005 and 2009. Super broke, I should mention. And sort of in that, I wasn't quite like the guy in Pi, but it was like, I was sort of frenetically trying to get this idea together without many resources. But I had the internet, and so when I discovered this, after reading that book, or as much of that book as I can, I decided, you know what? I'm just gonna find Bill Hillier. I'm just gonna write him. I'm gonna say, hey, Bill Hillier, I got an idea about your thing and hip hop culture, and I think it would be cool. And, lo and behold, he wrote me back and said, yeah, you're right on point, man. I'll connect you with some other people. And he did, and it was dope. And, we linked up and started developing this idea further and developing more research around this idea that I was having about the relationship between cultural emergence and spatial configuration. And they were saying, wow, you should come and do a degree or something. And, at that point, I was so broke that I laughed at that prospect. I was like, that's not even a thing. But soon after that, I started working at the city through a whole random series of circumstances. And so that was also the other reason why I would not go and do a degree, because I was just about to start getting some money. So, and that led to me into doing a whole bunch of other stuff. So one of the things that I did was work on the renewed action plan for arts, culture, and heritage for the city with an amazing team at City Hall and cultural development and initiatives. And that was what I was hired to do initially. And so it was interesting because I was seeing some of my interests sort of feed into the work that I was doing at City Hall now. Not necessarily directly doing spatial planning, but then just thinking about culture and working out how we're going to develop culture at the city level. But then I did get to do some spatial mapping stuff because we developed this thing, Ottawa XYZ, which is a cultural resource map, which everybody can go check out. It's like ottawaxyz.ca or ottawaxyz.com. And it's a resource map that helps us map out all the city's cultural resources and be able to do long-range sort of planning around them. And so that was sort of one of the other projects I was working on. And then I was doing other sort of Ottawa stuff too, in terms of the stuff I was doing outside of work. I was DJing and putting out records. We had put out this record with the Soul Jazz Orchestra. Does anybody know the Soul Jazz Orchestra? They're super boss, and they have a show coming up, I think in September. It's their new record release. Is it? And they're going to be playing at House of Paint tomorrow, of course. And so, yeah, definitely check out Soul Jazz at House of Paint tomorrow. But we were putting out records with them, and then I also put out my own solo record, Rito to Richmond. And actually, in the insert of Rito to Richmond, does anybody have that record? Anybody? I know 2 people who do. Whoa, 3, 4. Okay, that's good. I'm selling records. But in the insert of that record, there's actually a quote from one of the professors that Dr. Hillier hooked me up with about space syntax, because that project was really an investigation of how this network of record stores is connected through this one route in the city. And, as I was putting the music together, I was really also thinking about all the stuff that I had learned about the ways that networks of space work in cities and how this bus route was sort of manifesting that. And, I thought I would quote this prof in that. And then the other thing I've been working on is this music strategy and creative industry strategy at City Hall. It's something that we've been doing since 2013, started grinding on that, really working out of this recommendation in the culture plan about identifying Ottawa's cultural industries and developing a business and entrepreneurship economic cluster with our economic development partners. And through using this map that we developed, we discovered that we have a lot of resources in the music industry and that it made a lot of sense to start putting those pieces together. And so since 2013, I've been working with a whole bunch of different partners in the community, and we developed this thing, the Ottawa Music Industry Coalition, which has been really instrumental in doing a lot of work, not just around stuff like the Junos, but stuff like, has anybody been to Megaphono in the city? Yeah, okay, so then, all that work around that sort of emerged around the coalition coming to fruition, and now the coalition is running the city's strategy for developing or is running the process for developing the city's music strategy. And so, yeah, that's really exciting to see all that stuff taking place. And, with the music stuff, it was really, like I said, it was about taking all the stuff that we had and just sort of networking it and connecting it. And, as I started thinking about these problems, or I guess the way that we connect all of these dots, it got me, for whatever reason, I guess now, almost like 10 years later, reflecting back on the stuff that I was thinking about before around, how do we connect all of these, or, with respect to the music industry, how do we think about space? How do we think about the way that we connect all of the spaces for music? How do we plan for music, in the city long term, and not just in a sort of a policy, not just in, I guess, a quantitative or a qualitative way, but in a quantitative way, especially as I started thinking about, the city expanding through light rail, all these new developments that will be emerging, all these new points of connection within the city. And, again, it got me really reflecting back on this space is the machine thing, and Bill Hillier, and on space syntax, and sort of how I could think about those, or I could use those ideas to think about these new problems that I was trying to solve in my job. And so, I called up Bill Hillier again. And I said, hey, man, I'm thinking about all this stuff. What do you think? And he said, man, you're right on. You should come do a degree. So I said, okay. So I did this time. And now, next month, I'm moving to London to go do this degree. And so, it will be, a bit bittersweet because I'll be leaving Ottawa. But it does blow my mind a little bit that all of that, I was able to put all those pieces together here. And I think that speaks to a little bit to what this place is about and sort of the genius of this place. It's a place where you can try a lot of things, develop in a lot of interesting intersectional ways, and get where you're going, even though, you might have to try and fail and try and whatever. But it's interesting to think, just about how the city is growing, and where it's going, and what sort of what will the genius of this place, what will the genius loci of this place be like in 5 years? I'll be interested to see. But I ended with this slide because this is what we'll be looking at tonight when we're on this boat. We're going to be on this boat tonight celebrating the launch of House of Paint. And then, it's a thinly veiled going away party for me too. So, you all can come out and toast a glass, but beyond that, I just wanted to say thanks to Creative Ottawa Mornings, thanks to the city, because if I wasn't here, like I said, it's all about where you're at and how it influences you, and I don't think I would have been able to come up with these ideas if I wasn't here. So thanks to Ottawa, thanks to all of you for sitting and listening, and I think my time is up. Okay, that's it.